Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into the world of political media. We're going to look at what happens when a politician steps in front of the camera and how every single word, every answer gets put under the microscope, interpreted, and ultimately judged.
So, this is really the big question, isn't it? We're going to explore this by using a recent YouTube commentary as a case study. It's an analysis that really zeroes in on Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's recent media interviews, and we're going to break down exactly how her performance was received.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll set the scene. Then, we'll look at two specific interview moments that got a lot of heat. After that, we'll unpack the final verdict from our source material, and then talk about what this whole thing tells us about today's political media.
Okay, so the person at the center of all this is Jasmine Crockett. She's a congresswoman who is making a pretty high-stakes run for a Senate seat in Texas. And our source material is looking at how she did during a recent string of media appearances, basically putting her voter-facing persona to the test.
You know, the commentary we're looking at doesn't just see these as simple conversations. No, they're framed as a critical test. It's like they're asking, how does she really hold up under pressure when there's no script and the questions are coming fast on a national stage?
So let's dive into the first key moment that the source really picks apart. This one comes from an interview on MSNBC, where Crockett got a very direct question about policy.
The interviewer went right for a huge issue on voters' minds: affordability. Can I pay my bills? This was a direct, open invitation for the candidate to lay out some concrete, specific ideas that would actually help the people she wants to represent.
And Crockett's answer, well, it covered a lot of ground. She talked about raising the minimum wage, dealing with tariffs, healthcare costs, and then even brought up Supreme Court ethics reform. So on paper, it's a list of different policy positions. But here's the twist. Here's where the critique really lands. Despite that whole list of policies, the source commentary gives this really blunt assessment. The answer was a failure. The host claims she, quote, has no answers. And that just shows a huge gap between what was said and how it was perceived by this particular critic.
Now, the second interview that the source dissects gets into the really thorny issue of reparations. And this is where the criticism gets even sharper.
Right off the bat, the source labels Crockett's response as misinformation. The claim is that what she's saying now about reparations doesn't line up with what she said in the past.
And this slide really gets to the heart of it. On one side, you have the host's label that her answer is confusing, just word salad. But on the other side, you have Crockett's actual words, where she's framing her position around what's politically practical, what can actually get passed into law.
The source also shows that her full answer had other layers to it. She talked about historical context, she made this really sharp comparison to calls for aid for January 6 participants, and she questioned tax cuts for billionaires. It's a pretty complex argument that, in the end, the source's critique just kind of sweeps aside. So how does the source wrap all of this up? Well, the critique kind of zooms out from these specific answers to make a really broad judgment about her entire communication style.
Word salad just keeps popping up again and again in the source's analysis. And it's a really powerful way to dismiss what she's saying, not just as unclear, but as rambling and basically meaningless.
And then things get even broader. The critique expands beyond just Jasmine Crockett. The source actually draws a direct line to Vice President Kamala Harris, suggesting that this perceived problem with communication is something they both share. And here it is. This quote is the final, pretty harsh conclusion from the source's host. It's this sweeping judgment that calls both politicians clueless and says they can't articulate their positions. It really doesn't leave much room for any other interpretation.
Okay, so let's just step back for a second. We've just walked through this pretty intense piece of political commentary. What can we actually learn from this? What does it tell us about the world of political media we're all living in?
Well, I think this case study really shines a light on a key fact of modern politics. The delivery of a message can be judged just as fiercely as the message itself. The style, the confidence, how clear you seem to be. Every single part of how a politician communicates is being put under an incredibly intense microscope.
And that leaves us with a really important question, something for all of us to think about. When you're watching a leader, what do you weigh more heavily? Is it the actual list of policies they're proposing, or is it the style of their delivery, how clear and confident they sound? In this age of sound bites and nonstop commentary, figuring that out is a challenge for every single one of us.